The room was quiet. The 15th of February, 1988. Richard Feynman, Nobel laureate, bongo player, notorious safecracker, and the man who once stared at a spinning plate in a cafeteria until he understood something beautiful about wobble and physics, was dying in a Los Angeles hospital bed. 2 types of cancer, failing kidneys. The end of a life that had changed how humanity understood the universe. And in that final moment, as his consciousness flickered one last time, he opened his eyes, looked around the room, and said his last words. "I'd hate to die twice. It is so boring." Then he was gone. Every time I share that story, people laugh first, then they pause. Because there is something underneath the joke, something unsettling, if you follow it far enough. Why twice? What did Richard Feynman mean? Was it dark humor from a man who had made peace with death? Was it a shrug at the universe's indifference? Or was it something that only a physicist could say? Someone who had spent decades thinking about time, entropy, and the true meaning of irreversibility. I think it was all three. And I think buried inside those 7 words is one of the most profound physics lessons Feynman ever gave. He just didn't frame it as a lesson. He framed it as a complaint. This is the story of what those words actually reveal. About time, about entropy, about why the universe moves in only one direction, and why, at the deepest level of physics, it probably doesn't have to. The real reason why the arrow of time exists will not be what you expect. Let me take you through this step by step. What we think we know before we get to the strange part. Let's start with what everyone already believes. Time moves forward. You don't need a physics degree to know this. You feel it every single day. You remember yesterday. You can't remember tomorrow. The coffee in your mug cools down. It doesn't spontaneously heat back up. Broken glass stays broken. Candles burn down. People age. Living things die. This is so obvious, it barely feels worth saying. And yet, physicists have been quietly troubled by it for over 150 years. Here is the problem. Write down the fundamental equations that govern how particles behave. The equations of classical mechanics, electromagnetism, even quantum mechanics. And something remarkable falls out. Almost none of them have a preferred direction of time. Run those equations forward, and they describe reality accurately. Run them backward, reverse every particle's trajectory, every force's direction, and they still describe something physically valid. At the level of fundamental particles, the laws of physics are, to a very good approximation, time reversible. Which raises an obvious and alarming question. If the microscopic laws of physics are equally happy running in either direction, why does your macroscopic experience only ever run forward? Why doesn't the coffee reheat? Why doesn't the glass unbreak? Why, once living things stop, do they not restart? This was the question Feynman returned to again and again in his lectures. He called it one of the deepest unsolved problems in physics, not because we don't have an answer, but because the answer only pushes the mystery back further. It reveals something about the origin of the universe itself. The answer begins with entropy. And the real reason why the arrow of time exists is not what most people expect. Here is how Feynman explained it when he thought no one was watching. He didn't use equations first. He used a room. Imagine a bottle of perfume. You open the cap in the corner of a closed room. Within minutes, the scent has spread throughout the space. The molecules have drifted outward, mixing with air, dispersing in every direction. Now, why don't they drift back? Why don't all those perfume molecules spontaneously collect themselves back into the bottle? The obvious answer is that some physical law forbids it. But here's where it gets strange. No law does. There is no rule in physics that says a perfume molecule cannot drift toward the corner where the bottle sits. Each individual molecule's movement is physically reversible. Nothing is forbidden. The real reason is something else entirely. And nobody tells you this in a standard physics class. What physics actually reveals, the real reason the perfume molecules don't reassemble is about counting. There are incomprehensibly more ways for those molecules to be spread throughout the room than there are ways for them to be concentrated in one corner. The ratio isn't close. The number of spread out configurations exceeds the number of clustered configurations by a factor, so enormous it sits beyond any number a human being can meaningfully picture, something like 10 raised to the power of 10 raised to the power of 23. So when molecules move randomly, they are overwhelmingly likely to end up in a more spread out arrangement, not because physics forces them, because probability makes the alternative so laughably unlikely that it never happens in practice. This is what entropy actually is, not just disorder. That word flattens the idea into uselessness. Entropy, in the physicist's precise sense, is a measure of how many microscopic arrangements are consistent with what you observe at the large scale. High entropy means many possible arrangements. Low entropy means very few. Think of it this way. A brand new deck of cards has almost no entropy. There is only one way for it to be perfectly sorted by suit and rank. But a shuffled deck has enormous entropy. There are tens of millions of possible disordered arrangements. Quantum mechanics shows the same pattern at every scale of nature. The universe, driven by nothing more than the mathematics of probability, relentlessly moves from low entropy states toward high entropy ones, from order to disorder, from concentrated to dispersed, from alive to dead. And Feynman explained why this is not depressing. It is, he said, one of the most honest things physics ever tells you about reality. There is an equation carved on Ludwig Boltzmann's tombstone in Vienna. It defines entropy in terms of the number of microscopic arrangements that produce a given macroscopic state. It looks almost insultingly simple for what it does. But what it says rewrites your understanding of time itself. It tells you that the second law of thermodynamics, the famous rule that entropy always increases, is not actually a law in the traditional sense. It is a statistical truth so overwhelmingly probable that it behaves like a law. You could technically violate it. You never will. Feynman loved this framing. He once said that if science collapsed entirely and only a single idea had to survive to rebuild it, that idea should be the atomic hypothesis, that everything is made of atoms in ceaseless motion, because from that one idea, with enough careful thinking, you can reconstruct almost all of science. Add Boltzmann's entropy to that atomic picture, and something extraordinary happens. You derive the arrow of time, not as a mystical property of reality, not as a fundamental rule of the universe, but as an inevitable consequence of counting atoms. Physics proves that the direction of time is, at its root, a direction away from an improbably ordered beginning, not toward any destination, simply away. The universe had a starting hand, an extraordinarily well-organized one, and every moment since has been another shuffle toward the endless sea of possible disordered arrangements. Here is where the floor gives way. If entropy explains the arrow of time, there is an obvious next question. Why did the universe begin in such an extraordinarily low entropy state? This is where the explanation hits a wall. We can describe the mechanism of time's direction with mathematical precision. But the reason for those initial conditions, the reason the Big Bang produced such extreme order, has no satisfying physical answer yet. It is one of the deepest open questions in all of science. But here is the counterintuitive twist that nobody tells you when they explain entropy in school. Because the laws of physics are time symmetric, something extraordinary follows. In principle, a dead thing could come back to life. A broken thing could unbreak. An aged person could grow young. This is not metaphor. This is what follows from the equations. If you could precisely reverse the position and momentum of every particle involved in a death, every atom in a body, every photon emitted, every vibration in the surrounding air, the entire process would run backwards. Thermodynamically, physically, the organization would return. It would require precision so extreme, applied to so many particles, that it would take longer than the current age of the universe, multiplied by itself many times over. But the equations do not forbid it. Death, from the perspective of fundamental physics, is reversible in principle. Only in practice is it permanent. Sit with that for a moment, and then go back to the hospital room, back to February 1988, back to those 7 words. I'd hate to die twice. It is so boring. Why this changes everything. Here is what I think Feynman was expressing in that final moment, not as a conscious lecture, not as a planned farewell, but as the natural response of a man whose understanding of physics had fully written his intuitions, about existence. He knew in the deepest physical sense that his atoms had already died before. Billions of years before he was born, the elements that would eventually become Richard Feynman were forged in the cores of dying stars. Stellar nuclear fusion built carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, the building blocks of biology from simpler elements, then blasted them into space when those stars collapsed and exploded. Those atoms drifted through the interstellar void, condensed into the solar system, landed on Earth, cycled through oceans and rock and organisms across geological time before assembling, improbably briefly, magnificently, into the man who would give us Feynman diagrams and safe-cracking stories and bongo solos at Caltech. In a very real physical sense, those atoms had died many times before landing in that hospital bed. They had been part of countless organized structures that dissolved back into simpler arrangement. Every atom in Feynman's body had already been through cycles of order and dissolution that would astonish you if you traced them in full. From that perspective, dying twice isn't a dark joke. It is an accurate description of what atoms do on cosmological timescales. This isn't just beautiful language. This is what happens when you apply the physics of entropy and deep time to a single human life. Every organized structure in the universe is temporary. Every arrangement of atoms that achieves something extraordinary, a star, a planet, a person, a thought, is a local eddy of improbable order in a universe, drifting toward maximum entropy. And when that eddy dissipates, the atoms don't vanish. They continue. They recombine. They become new eddies. Feynman understood this. And that understanding is, I believe, what made him genuinely curious rather than afraid, not resigned, not stoic, just amused by the whole arrangement. The way he was amused by everything physics revealed about reality. He once said the fact that he would eventually be forgotten didn't trouble him as much as the eventual heat death of the universe. The point billions of years from now, when entropy reaches its maximum, stars go dark, and no more thoughts are possible anywhere. That, he said with mock outrage, was worth complaining about. A man with that sense of scale doesn't fear his own death. He finds it mildly repetitive. And here is the question I want to leave you with. If the laws of physics are truly time, symmetric, if irreversibility is a statistical accident rather than a fundamental rule, then is the past really fixed? Or is that distinction something that only exists inside minds like ours, built from entropy, living inside entropy, perceiving time's arrow, because we are made of the universe's own unwinding? Feynman never gave a final answer to that. I think he was glad there wasn't one. If this changed how you are thinking about time, or about what Feynman was really saying in those last 7 words, hit like. These ideas deserve more people thinking seriously about them. I am building Feynman Diary as a place where physics isn't just handed to you in clean textbook sentences. It is explored the way Feynman himself explored it, with honest curiosity, a refusal to pretend things are simpler than they are, and an occasional dark joke when the universe becomes too strange to take seriously. Subscribe if that is what you want more of. Next time, I am taking you into a problem that kept Feynman restless in the final years of his life. It involves particles that appear to share information across distances that should make that communication impossible. Physicists have run the experiments thousands of times. The result is always the same, and it still refuses to make sense, no matter how carefully you look at it. You've probably heard of it, but I promise, not like this.